Morning, evening, afternoon. Remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO, John Michael, is reading a textbook cover to cover. Today, we start chapter 33 on page 826. This chapter is called Europe and North America between 1945 and present. Present is 2001, because that's when this book was copywritten, published in 2002. 2001's a more of a buzzword year, though. Copyright date, too. Okay. Section 1 of this new chapter, Europe and North America between 1945 and 2001, Western World. An overview. Setting the scene. Western Europe rebounded out of the rubble of World War II. During post-war years, standard of living rose dramatically. People earned higher wages, bought homes with central heating and running water, and enjoyed luxuries unheard of in earlier times. Amid these comforts, many other changes were shaping the Western world. Europe, the Cold War, and after. I gotta get a pair of sunglasses. My name's John Michael at the Context is Everything Media Network. Please, at 59 subscribers for the past 3 weeks, I've been a little bit slow. Thank you, all 59. I very much appreciate you. I'll continue to make content, and please, 60. Please. Thank you. I need to get a pair of sunglasses, don't mind me. Every chapter I wear a new pair of sunglasses, but I only have a couple, so they're starting to cycle around, so you might recognize them. If you've been tuning in, you probably recognize the sunglasses. I'm not going to wear the ones that I was going to just grab because they're way too dim, you know? They're too dark. I can't really read. These, much easier to read with. Still a little bit of a headache. That's all right. Europe, the Cold War and after. New heading. More than 40 years, the Cold War divided Europe into two hostile military alliances. The communist nations of Eastern Europe, dominated by the Soviet Union, formed the Warsaw Pact. The Western democracies, led by the United States, formed NATO. The superpowers avoided direct confrontation in Europe, but some issues brought the continent to the brink of war. The Berlin Wall. Berlin was the focus of Cold War tensions. The city was split into democratic West Berlin and communist East Berlin. In the 1950s, West Berlin became a showcase for Western German prosperity. Thousands of low-paid East Germans, discontented with communism, slipped into West Berlin. To stop the exodus, East Germany built a wall in 1961 that separated the two sectors of the city. When completed, the wall was a massive concrete barrier topped with barbed wire and patrolled by guards. The Berlin Wall was an ugly symbol of the Cold War and an embarrassment for the Soviets. It showed workers far from enjoying communist paradise had been forcibly restrained from fleeing. The nuclear threat. The Cold War triggered an arms race, with both sides producing huge arsenals of nuclear weapons. Critics argued that nuclear war would destroy both sides. Yet superpowers claimed that they dared not stop. Each side wanted to have their power to deter the other from launching its nuclear weapons. The result was a balance of terror, in quotation marks. During the arms race, both superpowers spent huge sums of money on weapons. Such spending meant cutbacks in other areas. In 1953, President Dwight Eisenhower warned Americans about the impact. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, signifies a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. I don't know what that means. Disarmament and détente. To reduce the threat of nuclear destruction, both sides met at disarmament talks. Although mutual distrust often blocked progress, they did sign some agreements, such as the 1963 Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It banned the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. Underground testing was still permitted, however. By the 1970s, American and Soviet leaders promoted an area of détente, or relaxation of tensions. The two superpowers made new agreements to reduce nuclear stockpiles. Détente ended, however, after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. End of the Cold War. By the 1990s, as you will read, economic and foreign policy troubles threatened the Soviet Union. A new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, eased Soviet grip on Eastern Europe. One by one, communist governments fell. Communism even fell from power in the Soviet Union, which broke up into separate independent republics. When the Cold War ended, nations in the Western and Eastern Europe sought normal relations. Germany was reunited, the Warsaw Pact solved. The Warsaw Pact dissolved. NATO, originally formed to defend the West against communism, had refined its role in the post-Cold War world. Troublesome issues. As the century neared its end, Europeans faced troublesome issues, new and old. Russia and the nations of Eastern Europe turned to the West for loans and investment to build capitalist economies. Ethnic clashes, especially in the Balkans, created conflicts that threatened the peace of Europe. The nuclear peril was reduced, but it still remained. The United States, Russia, and other nations still had nuclear weapons. As disarmament talks continued, there were fears that some Russian nuclear material might end up in the hands of other nations and groups. NATO's new role. With the Cold War over, NATO allowed Eastern Europe's former communist nations to join the alliance. In 1999, Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic entered the organization. Despite Russians' protests, several other Eastern European states sought admission. In the 1990s, conflict in the Balkans posed new challenges to NATO. When ethnic groups in Bosnia and Kosovo tried to break away from Yugoslavia, war erupted. Europeans witnessed the worst fighting since World War II and were shocked by horrible abuses of human rights. As you will read, NATO members finally sent military forces into both Kosovo and Bosnia. Those moves sparked debate over whether NATO should become Europe's peacekeeper and protector of human rights. So is that what it is? It said NATO's new role is the title of the subheading. And it says sparks debate. But that is its new role. You're insinuating because you said that's the heading. New heading. Economic and political trends. In the 1950s, Western Europeans recovered quickly from World War II. With the Marshall Plan aid, their economies boomed. They rebuilt industries, farms, and transportation networks that were destroyed by the war. Meanwhile, right-wing parties were discredited because they had supported fascism. Communists and socialists had resisted the Nazis during the war, enjoying growing support. communists and socialists who had resisted the Nazis during the war enjoyed growing support. As a result, post-war government in France, Italy, and Germany adopted many policies favored by the left. The welfare state. A major goal of leftist parties was to extend the welfare state. Under this system, the government keeps most features of capitalists' economy, but take greater responsibility for the social and economic needs of its people. The welfare state had its roots in the late 1800s, when governments passed reforms to ease the hardships of the industrial age. During that period, Germany, Britain, and other nations had set up unemployment insurance and old age pensions. After 1945, governments expanded these social programs. Both the middle class and the poor enjoyed increasing benefits from national health care, unemployment insurance, and old age pensions. Other programs gave aid to the poor and created an economic cushion to help people get through difficult times. Still, the welfare state was costly, involving many burdensome taxes and greater government regulations of private enterprises. Socialists support a welfare state and a larger role for government and economy. In Britain, France, and elsewhere, governments nationalized basic industries such as railroads, airlines, banks, steel, and energy. Conservatives condemned the drift from free enterprise system towards socialism. The oil shock. In 1973, the West suffered an economic shock when OPEC... Why are you writing OPEC and not saying what OPEC means? I'm sure that you've said it previously, as you've read previously in this book, but why would I remember what OPEC is off the top of my head? Just write it out, and then put OPEC in parentheses after it. Oil producing something, something, something. I don't know. Because most Western European countries used imported oil to fuel industries, the higher oil prices caused inflation and slowed economic growth. In 1979, OPEC again raised prices, triggering a severe recession in which businesses slowed and unemployment rates rose. Economic shifts. At the same time, the West faced growing competition from other parts of the world. For 200 years, the bulk of the world's factory goods came from factories in the West. By the 1980s, however, the pattern changed. Japan, already an industrial power, enjoyed dramatic growth after World War II. Other countries, such as China and India, also expanded their industries. In addition, Western-based multinational corporations set up factories in the developing world, where labor was cheap. From there, they exported goods to the West. Many factories in the West closed because they could not make goods as cheaply as industries in other parts of the world. Unemployment rates rose in the West. Western nations remained rich and powerful, but their economies changed. Most new jobs were created not in manufacturing but in service industries. A service industry is one that provides services rather than a product. Service industries include healthcare, finance, sales, education, and recreation. The economic slowdown of the 1970s and 1980s forced governments to cut costs. Some moved away from welfare state, reducing benefits. Conservative governments privatized state-owned industries. In a new political and economic climate, the gap between rich and poor grew, but most people still enjoyed a relatively high standard of living. New heading. Toward European unity. New heading. Economic cooperation helped Western Europe to recover from World War II. In 1952, 6 nations: France, West Germany, Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, set up European Coal and Steel Community. This independent agency set up prices and regulated coal and steel industry of member states. This small start spurred economic growth across Western Europe and led to further regional cooperation. The Common Market. In 1957, the same six nations signed a treaty to form the European Community, EC, or Common Market. Its goal was to expand free trade. Why is it EC or Common Market? Its goal was to expand free trade. The Common Market gradually ended tariffs on goods and allowed workers to capital to move freely across national borders. It set up a European Parliament and a multinational body elected by citizens of the Common Market countries. Its powers were limited, however, its member states remained independent. Despite disputes between members, the Common Market prospered. In 1973, after much debate, Britain was admitted along with Denmark and Ireland. The Common Market. What a strange name for something. Does this turn into the European Union? I don't get it. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Common Market expanded competition with greater cooperation. The EU expanded further to... In the 1980s and 1990s, the Common Market expanded further and took the name European Union. By replacing destructive competition and greater cooperation, the EU, European Union, promoted regional prosperity, peace, and security. The EU pushed for complete economic unity and greater political unity. It replaced national passports with EU passports, and it ended most tariffs. In 1999, the EU began launching the euro, a single currency to be used by member nations. The EU members welcomed the benefit of cooperation, but nationalist feelings remained strong in individual nations. Thus, the United States of Europe seemed unlikely to emerge anytime soon. Still, the EU was a powerful force helping Europe compete with economic superpowers like the United States and Japan. With just over 6% of the world's population, the EU controlled about 20% of the world's trade. As the 1990s ended, growth of the EU seemed likely as Eastern European countries such as Hungary and Czech Republic sought admission. I gotta get my Italian citizenship. I really need to do that. Social trends. New heading. Social change speeded up after 1945, and class lines blurred as prosperity spread. For most Western history, a tiny wealthy class had dominated society. By the 1950s, though, more and more people belonged to the middle class. As wages rose, working class people bought homes and cars, and their children attended universities. Although pockets of poverty remained, most people had opportunities unknown in earlier times. Ethnic diversity. Since the 1950s, many immigrants from former colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean had settled in Europe. In Germany, other European countries, guest workers from Turkey and Middle East provided low-wage labor for booming economies. Many Eastern Europeans fled economic hardships to find work in the West. Some Europeans resented newcomers who competed with them for scarce jobs and brought new cultural influence. As a result, many newcomers faced discrimination and segregation. In a few countries, ultranationalists and racist thugs attacked and even killed foreign workers and immigrants. In 2000, in Austria, members of an anti-immigrant party assumed a leading role in a new coalition government. Women. In 1949, French writer Simone de Beauvoir analyzed the status of women in Western society. The two sexes have never shared the world in equality, and even today, women even today, woman is heavily handicapped, though her situation is beginning to change. Almost nowhere is her legal status the same as a man's. The Second Sex by Simone de Beaulieu. Since then, women in the West have made progress towards legal and economic equality. A growing number of women work outside the home. Despite efforts to ensure equality, however, women's pay lagged behind that of men. Women often ran into a glass ceiling, an invisible barrier that kept them from the top jobs. However, women gradually chipped away at old attitudes and narrowed the gender gap in hiring, promotions, and pay. As women's income increased, so did her family's standard of living. Family life, and this will be the end of our time today. Thank you. Family life. Devotion to family ideals remained strong in the West, but family life changed. Western families had fewer children than in the past. Children stayed in school longer to get needed skills. Family life seemed less stable as divorce rates climbed. In cases in which divorced parents failed to fulfill financial responsibilities, children suffered. At the same time, increasing numbers of children were being born to unwed mothers. Often dependent on one income, a growing number of single-parent families found themselves living in poverty. Have a good day. God bless.